Hey, everybody, welcome back again to our follow-up podcast episode. You can see, for those who are on the YouTube video thing, I've got guests. We're all around the table. We've got sparkling water and coffee, and it's a long day of work that you're finding us. But I think this is when we're at our best because it's the most exciting. This is when liabilities happen, when we're a little tired. But we're excited to be here to follow up with the conversations we've been having around generosity. You guys know that we've been doing this sermon series called Giving Away Generosity for the Life of the World. And that's a part of actually a whole season of generosity where our church is focusing on how we use what God has given us for the sake of others, the acts of generosity. And so I've invited some of our staff, Father Ryan and Deacon Courtney and Melissa Gray, who's our director of children, just to speak from not only the sermons that we've been giving in these last weeks of the sermon series, but also from what kids are doing in their classrooms as well. And what I'm hoping that we can do for you, either the listener or the viewer, or res people, is just unpack, talk a little bit more about some of the things that really is hard to touch on in a 15-minute sermon, right? Mm-hmm. There's always so much that gets cut and it's left on the editing floor, or there's always so much more to talk about, even with kids and really with adults, about the formation involved in creating generous people in ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the important things, there's really two things that I'm really proud of our church for being able to do, but is just also really critical as we talk about giving and generosity and money. That number one, we have a God who cares for us and who provides for our needs. And in that context of provision and gift is the context we're having this conversation, not in scarcity, not in fear even, but really in the safety and in the comfort of being loved by a God who has not only given us life, but has provided for that life and for others as well. So that's a radical place to begin this conversation, to have this conversation within, compared to where we find a lot of money conversations. It's in a very totally different context, right? There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. And even some of you, I'm sure, can relate to, we even experience that. We live in this world, so we get that. But also the reason we talk about this is because this is really a matter of discipleship and formation. Generosity, money, these things are parts of who we are and who God is shaping us to be into conformity, being transformed by the renewing of our minds into the image of Jesus of Nazareth. That's the point. And when we look at him, we see someone incredibly, perfectly generous, in fact. So as you're jumping into this conversation with us, I just feel like that's got to be on the table. Those are really big pieces for us in this conversation, and I hope they help guide and give some framework to our discussion. So we could do this sort of any way we'd like, but I thought let's do some sermon like unpacking a little discussion. Go around the table.
Sounds good to me.
And we can criticize each other or like nitpick some things.
No, we can't.
No, none of that.
That's off the table.
That's not the point.
Oh, wrong table. Sorry,
We'll leave that to our parishioners.
That's a different meeting. No, we don't do that. We high five each other all the time. But I don't want to. Since I'm talking already, can we jump into? Was it your sermon that was next? I think Deacon Courtney, you preached a few weeks ago.
This past weekend.
This last
Sunday,
week, that's right. Oh, you were the week before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Thanksgiving is like a time warp.
Yep.
So maybe we start with yours because yours was further back.
Sure.
Yeah, and the title of your sermon was "The God Who Gives Away." Mm-hmm. So tell us about the passage you're dealing with, and maybe even what's still on your heart and on your mind as you're thinking about that sermon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually what feels like a theme throughout. So even just what you said before about like us, we believe in a generous God. And I think you touched on this a lot in your sermon, Courtney. And I mean, I think there's this sense of like the good news in all of this is that we believe in a generous God, a God of abundance. And out of that flows everything, right? Like, so there's all of the implications come from that being kind of the central good news, right? That's the whole reason why we can talk about generosity is because we have a generous God. And so that's just, as you were saying that earlier, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is like, you probably are going to hear a familiar thread throughout all of our sermons. All of this whole series, I think, is really founded on that reality, this idea that what is the name of the sermon series?
Giving away.
Yeah.
And then the subtitle.
What is the
Courtney knows.
Generosity for the life of the world.
Yeah. There you go. I like it.
Well, we should do the title and subtitles
Oh my
word for word,
gosh.
like around the table. You know the game where you.
I do, but I would fail at it miserably. I don't remember things. Anyway, so my text that I like centered on in my sermon was Matthew 6, the kind of the famous Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon. Right, like that was like the first, I think, verse in the text that I preached from. This idea that like no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon, which in the Greek or the Aramaic, that's a word for wealth. And then he kind of goes on to go into this whole little conversation around anxiety and like, do not be anxious. Consider the lilies of the field or the birds of the air, and how they neither toil nor spin, and yet God, gives what they need and all that. And
Can I ask you a question about this? Because
yes.
I'm curious. If you're hearing the word mammon for the first time, you may think like, where has this been? Right. So when Jesus is using this word, this idea, is it just about money, or is it sort of a deeper? Is there anything else to that?
Yeah, well,
I'm not as well studied in this as you have, but I'm kind of curious.
I don't know about that. But what I said in my sermon was essentially that mammon over time has like, it can be interpreted in different ways, but often the church interpreted it as like an idol or a god that kind of like is a counterfeit to our God, the living God, the God of abundance. And so in the medieval times, I said in my sermon that they actually considered this like a pagan god.
Oh, interesting.
They would refer to mammon as like the pagan god mammon, and it had everything to do with the idea of wealth and all that. So, but it is like they consider wealth almost like to be the equivalent of like a pagan god.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think I've actually seen mammon named as a demon in a movie or something before.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a quote. I couldn't say it off the top of my head, but I think it was Peter Abelard, kind of one of these like medieval writers, kind of refers to it specifically that way. But either way, the idea is that it is an idol. I mean, Jesus says this, right? He's like, you cannot serve God and mammon. So the assumption there is that we can serve mammon as an idol, and so it's about wealth as an idol in our lives.
And we don't. I mean, we can serve the god of mammon is, I think, a religious way of saying something that we all experience in the world we live in, which is that's kind of what everyone's doing, right? Like, it's not just philosophical or religious.
Yep.
This is describing things as they are.
Yeah,
kind of the status quo. Right?
We could.
I guess practically, what does that look like then? When you see, or when we see in our own lives, like, oh, I think I'm serving mammon here. That sounds harsh.
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
Because
Go for it.
Well, I just, I think you can easily fall into the mindset that like any consuming, like anything I purchase or anything that I do for the benefit of my family or my own welfare is mammon and bad. So you can kind of go to this. I don't think all of that is mammon. I think it becomes mammon when that thing becomes the idol.
Right.
So I think you have to make a distinction there between like what is healthy, for lack of a better word, consumption, just to care for your basic needs. And then when that crosses that unhealthy line and becomes something that now is where all of your heart's desires are focused.
Yep,
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Even thinking about like going into the Christmas season, which is a season full of gifts and giving.
Does it have anything to do with the god of mammon?
Yes.
Do you think?
Well, no, I'm saying like so
Maybe.
I feel like that was...
But Krista Gregg, shout out to Krista Gregg, she reposted something about how we can give generously to each other and we don't have to be chintzy with our gifts or like not give our kids a good Christmas because we don't want them to get like not be generous or be
Right.
or serve the god of mammon, but we can give them generously out of abundance because God gives generously. So it's like that mimicking God and his generous giving and like spinning it. So when you were saying how it all depends on what's going on underneath the surface, I think that's really like the heart of the matter is really important.
The Gregs are always so thoughtful.
I know.
I mean, if you want like
We
some
should have
good
them on
book
a
recommendations,
podcast. They would love that.
if you want like good book recommendations, to follow Krista
Oh
on
my gosh,
Instagram.
follow Chris.
She's got good stuff on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, back to you.
No, it's great. I was just going to say that I think to kind of like circle back around, I think I had two thoughts on that. I think one is that I think it's the air we breathe, it's the water we swim in. In our American culture, that mammon is should be, if we think about the idols that exist in our world, the things that we tend towards. And I think you're right. Like it's not like we're always serving mammon, but it's probably one of the biggest concerns we should be considering always.
Yeah.
We live in
because-
an economy based on consumerism.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's-
Right. And we live in the wealthiest country in the world. So I mean, I think there's a baseline there. I think that we should just be like, yeah, this is probably something we struggle with. That
Society is like engineered for this.
seems
Right.
like an obvious thing to say, but
Capitalism.
and there's so much to be said about that. There's so much we could unpack about that, but I think I'll leave it at that. The other thing, which I think is really interesting and a way to gauge this, and I said this in my sermon, one of the ways we can gauge whether or not mammon is an idol is anxiety, right? It's like Jesus
Ooh, interesting.
talks about this as like, do not be anxious. It's like, well, if you're anxious about money, then it's possible. That's not entirely true because there's people who like don't have anything and they're anxious about whether they can pay their next, mortgage bill or rent or whatever it might be. There's certainly reasons to be anxious about money for people who have nothing and need money to survive. But for many of us who have much, I think anxiety is actually a really good basis for checking on whether or not it is an idol. Because a lot of us are anxious about money and we don't really need to be.
Yeah.
Or we
Or it's
we
like
have a lot.
self-inflicted
Yeah.
in some ways too, right? Like
I think so.
Overspending or just sort of not being a good steward or signing up for way too much, like, subscribing to way too many or keeping up with the Joneses, as they've said, right? As we know that feeling.
Yeah.
Or for me, like it's so easy to like, oh, we need this. I'm going to just get it real quick on Amazon Prime or something. And then those moments sort of add up.
Right.
And
right. Yeah,
dang
totally.
it, Jeff Bezos.
And I think the distinction is that, like, I'm not saying this if you have too much money if you're anxious or something like that. I'm saying the anxiety comes when we feel like we need to hoard it.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
We have to take it
Protect
instead
it.
of giving away, which we're called to do. Right. This whole series is kind of founded on this idea that like we believe in a God who gives away, and we're called to do the same. And so that anxiety, I think, is oftentimes connected to this idea that like, oh, we have to hold on to this. You know?
So
Or we have, if once we obtain this thing, then
right.
we'll be okay, right? So it's like once we buy the house, once we have this, kids' education or level of savings, whatever the thing is, you're anxious to meet that goal, and you think when you meet it, you'll be okay. And I mean, maybe sometimes a bit, but again, it's sort of like, what is your heart craving? It's a security that maybe can't be found in the place you're looking for it.
So I think it's one thing to know that that's true, but then what do you like if Jesus was sitting down with someone who's anxious about their needs? How would Jesus minister to the anxiety? Not just, I mean, he does say like, do not worry, be not anxious, right? But it's not a suppress your anxiety or just pretend that you're not worried. He seems to be offering a different, deeper sort of ministry, a care for the soul, in the context of like, hey, don't you know I care for you? Don't you know that God provides for you? Look at the lilies of the field, right? The birds of the air. Do you think God's going to leave you hanging and then like clothe and provide for all of creation, everything except for you? So there's some ministry that's happening there too. And I'm wondering if someone, I think most people hearing this will say, yeah, I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to worry, but I do. So then what? And it's not really helpful just to hear, and you're not saying this, it's not helpful just to say, well, like, get over it,
Right, of course.
There's got to be some practices, some inner work, some questions, some care for the soul, right? To help us get through that. I'm just curious, pulling the table here on the spot, because we've all suffered with this. How do you care for yourself? Or how do you pray with those concerns? Or how do you hear God speaking to you to heal some of that worry and anxiety?
Yeah. I feel like it almost sounds like trite at this point, but maybe I do think there's wisdom in just being present and being grateful for like whatever is happening in your day. Because I mean, I have the tendency, I'm living for the future. Like I'm always working towards that next goal or, just living for the next day. And it really, at least for me, it actually is a discipline to like just be present with my family or like today's a gorgeous day. I'm like staring out the window. It's beautiful. Like, again, it sounds almost trite, but there's truth in it. Just trying to be present to the gifts and that are there in the day and just to be grateful for that. So,
This reminds me of the other morning. Was it yesterday morning? We're praying as a staff. Courtney came out of nowhere with some prayer. We were like, almost brought me to tears. We opened our eyes after we said amen, opened our eyes like, where did that come from? But it was all this like, God, it's a beautiful day, and there's so much to be grateful for. And it was very much a prayerful practice of presence.
Okay, but I told you I'd read a little thing by Thomas Merton that morning, so it's like it's not just like, oh, I spontaneously came up with this great prayer. I mean, I actually like I have to work for it, and some of that even includes like reading people who inspire me when I have time. You know, I don't do it 45 minutes every morning. It's like 5 minutes while I'm like jamming down the grape nuts. So yeah,
Grape nuts for breakfast.
it's healthy, man.
Yeah,
Good
I
stuff.
like grape nuts a lot too.
Warm in the winter.
Really?
So you don't.
I don't eat
I don't
grape
either.
nuts for
I mean, I'm not
breakfast.
opposed to them, but I didn't know this was a thing.
It is.
Grape nuts and Thomas Merton. They're like the key.
The key to worry and anxiety
Sorry,
about
taking
money.
away
That's how you
anxiety.
should start your morning. No, I was going to say just to kind of piggyback off that. I was the story I told in my sermon was about my friend Sam back in Milwaukee when we had our small group that met for 3-ish. I mean, it met for longer than that, but for like 3 years, it felt like he would force us every time we met, every week, every Monday night. He would say, we need to go around the room and give thanks. So so every time we'd have some time in prayer and sharing, he'd always be like, but I want everyone to go around and say one thing they're thankful for in this past week. And so just pausing and being present and just saying, okay, what do I have to be grateful for? Like, is such a huge part of this, this work of like, to your point of like, how can we work on this area of our life? I think it has to do with like, if we do believe in a generous God, let's actually be present to that generosity.
Yeah, this is really practical, right? It's a
Does that make
spiritual
sense?
practice, actually, right? So, for instance, if you find yourself saying, like, or sighing all the time, like, ugh, we're not going to have enough to do this, or you're frustrated about things, this will be a very difficult spiritual practice for you to listen to what you're saying throughout the day, not just in prayer, but like the way you talk anywhere in your life, and listen for gratitude and look for opportunities to, instead of express scarcity or frustration or despair or, anxiety or fear, to opt for maybe a moment to, and it may feel kind of silly, but there's some serious power, right, in being able to say, I'm grateful. I may not have this and I need this, but Lord, I'm grateful for fill in the blank. It puts you in a totally different space. And I think what's really key about that, it's not just like manifesting gratitude, it's nothing like that. It's actually acknowledging reality, that God exists, is present, knows your needs, is concerned with them even more than you are. And sort of acknowledging that, saying, you know what, I do need this. Yeah. And I'm worried or I'm afraid. But God, I'm grateful that I have a God who cares about me. I'm grateful for the family I have. I'm grateful for the shelter I have. It sort of puts you back present, as you would say. It makes you present again. I think so. That sounds silly, but that's something I find myself doing when I get sort of caught in the whirlpool of scarcity.
Yeah. So table groups, this could be a great, like something to do, a practice you could do as a table group is spend some time giving thanks, like doing what we did like back in Milwaukee, which is maybe just go around the circle and say, acknowledge one or two things that you have to be grateful for in the past week. This is a part of examine, like the practice of examine. So if you practice examine, you'll know that part of it is giving thanks to God for the things he's done over the past day.
Yeah, that's
it's
powerful.
just, it is a practice that I think is so critical to kind of actually learning how to be generous, is recognizing that, we believe in a generous God.
So that's like an individual practice, but then like we shouldn't leave unmentioned. There's a communal practice of giving thanks that we call the Holy Eucharist, literally what the Holy Eucharist is about, where you can turn around and see a whole community giving thanks to God in response to the gift that God has given us in his son. So if you're like needing to needing that soul care, that work. That's a good place to begin.
Yeah.
Like,
and I feel like that's why it is so important to come to church, you know, because it isn't just, you know, I'm going to hear a sermon I'm going to learn some things. I mean, it is like every week we're doing that discipline of coming and giving thanks together. And sometimes you don't feel it, but you're carried along by everyone else who's participating in this feast of gratitude. So that's just a kind of an easy discipline because you really just have to show up.
yeah. And it is a relief, huh? When you're not feeling it, for other people to carry you with their gratitude.
Yeah.
It's like transforms you too, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been at church kind of grumpy and then someone sort of at the peace gives me a big hug and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
like that changes everything.
Yeah. I mean, again, I feel like I'm going to say this more than once, but like this was in my sermon as well. Like I can't tell you what minute it was in, so you can't go back and listen, but I talk about the Eucharist as the ultimate kind of moment where we get to weekly encounter the God who gives away, right? Jesus, we literally say in the liturgy, this is my body given for you, right? And so we experience the generosity of God as we participate in the Eucharist. And that is a corporate thing, right? Like we do that together. So anyway.
You covered this.
I might have covered this. I don't want to like...
I know. I feel like every point we raise, he's like, in my sermon.
Ryan, if you were there, if you would have listened, I had mentioned this.
No. I don't mean it like that. I just mean, I think everything you're saying, I'm glad you're saying it because I think it affirms that I wasn't crazy with my sermon, basically.
No, and actually, what I'm saying probably is just your sermon deeply embedded in my consciousness.
There you go. So it does work. Preaching does work.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about the scripture verse about like look around, and I keep hearing the Ellie Holcomb song. It's called "Don't Worry." It's part of a kids album, and the kids
Be
actually
happy? Is that how it goes?
no.
Come on, Sean.
It was too easy. It's right there.
I thought it, but I didn't say it.
Oh, see, that's the difference. Maturity and done. Oh, yeah.
But the kids actually listened to it on Sunday.
Oh, fun.
When they were coloring, I had the volunteers play the song. And part of the song is talks about, so look around you, try to listen to the song creation sings, and don't you worry because you're in the hands of the God who made everything. So it makes me think about meditating on creation, and when you have moments of anxiety, like going outside and standing and looking around in creation and noticing all of the ways that God takes care of his world or provides for creation is also another way that you can kind of calm anxiety down.
That's great. That's actually great. It reminds me of that Wendell Berry poem about like when despair in the world kind of, this is a paraphrase because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but he talks about how like when I'm despairing, when the despair of the world is like enveloping me, I come into the peace of the still waters. And he talks just about like how you just need to get out into nature to find some of the, like, to find a balm for the anxiety that we feel. So, so I'm with you on that. We just had our creation care group last night, and we were not talking about this specifically, but one of the themes of the conversations we've been having is around this idea that like creation can speak so much, like as we immerse ourselves in creation, like it does help us kind of release some of the anxieties of, they have this term called forest bathing. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Come again? What's this?
There's a practice
where you
called
go bathe in the river?
Yeah, no, it's not that at all.
In the forest.
It's forest bathing. It's immersing yourself in nature as a way to like kind of be present to yourself and anxieties and things like that. So it's more than that. It's way more than that, but it's a practice we can do.
I'm picturing you forest bathing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine it myself. Yeah.
Rubbing pine leaves on your face and stuff like that.
You're making fun of forest
I
bathing.
am with you.
I like forest bathing. Who doesn't like forest bathing? Never heard of it.
It's just a fancy word of saying like you need to be out in nature because it does exactly what you're talking about, Melissa. It does. There's something about creation that is. It's praising God. It's doing what it's being called and created to do in a way that like we can like enter into that space in a way that's like it is peaceful. It does kind of reorient ourselves. So
yeah.
And realizing that the birds, they don't worry but they do prepare. So there's that like tug and pull of how can we be generous and not be hoarders, but also do what God has called us to do, which is what I think this whole series has been really nice, because it hasn't been prescriptive. Like, this is the amount that you have to give, which growing up, tithing and giving was very prescriptive. There wasn't much space for you to really think about and meditate on what God is calling you to give. So I think that kind of also helps you balance.
Yeah. Speaking of nature, though, and hoarding, except for squirrels.
Yeah.
Except for squirrels.
You know, they don't even know where they buried like 90% of their nuts.
I know, and
That
they're all
could be
in
a
my
sermon
backyard.
title. Don't be a squirrel.
Don't be a... Okay, you got to design the next sermon series, Courtney.
Well, I was going to say you're the last person to preach on giving, so it might have to be this next Sundays.
I was telling I didn't participate. I just preached first.
No, I
kicked it
know.
off.
I'm just saying, like,
close it off. And
that's
don't be
the
a
only
squirrel.
one left. So only one more title could be done. Be a squirrel in this series.
$20 if I can fit "Don't be a squirrel" into the sermon.
Yeah.
All right. Where were we?
Segue to sheep.
Segue to sheeps. Courtney,
And goats.
And goats.
speaking of animals,
Yeah.
tell us about your sermon was the generous sheep. What was I mean, it's one thing. I don't know if sermon preaching is like terrible and wonderful all at once, right? And some part of the experience, just to share with people who are listening, is you go through this like grueling preparation process, and it is like heavy lifting. It's a lot of work. And then you preach, and then you walk away from the pulpit. A few days later, you're like, oh, now it's hitting me in a different way, or here's another part of it. And so we're coming to this table a little bit more fully baked. I'm curious for your sermon, looking back at it now, like what are the things that are occurring to you that are sticking out that, whether you said it or not, like apparently we said everything that you already said, but are there things in your sermon that you're like, this was what it was all about, and here's what I'm still thinking about since preaching?
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you didn't hear my sermon, some of the passages from Matthew 25, and it was the judgment scene where there's a separation of the sheep and the goats. And the sheep, who are the generous ones, are sent to heaven, and the goats, who are not the generous ones, are sent the other way.
P.S. This
The
is
other
a
way.
really hard passage to translate
Yeah.
to children.
Yeah.
P.S.
Interesting coloring sheets. For that.
Yeah.
Okay, so and we're trying to wrap up giving into this, and when I'm preaching, I'm often bringing sort of my own experience of how has it been preached in the past, and like Melissa said, I mean, I think that giving is often preached with this. There's kind of some guilt and fear in it, and I think that this passage also can carry some guilt and fear. So like you read it and you think, oh, I should be like a sheep. I need to give more, and if I don't, I'll be like the goat, and I'll wind up, the place you don't want to go.
In hell.
Yeah, and so I do think that people want to be generous, and I wanted to just, rather than like make this like the bad news of like you need to do this to avoid punishment, like how do we make this the good news of like you are a sheep already, like you're baptized, you're God's own beloved, and so how do you just grow in your vocation of being a sheep, of being the generous person that God has created you to be? And so I think for me, it was more about like, rather than saying just give more, it's more like dismantling those things that stand in the way of us becoming generous people.
Yeah, I thought you did, like, especially in this, I thought you did a really good job in saying this is who you are, rather than give in order to be classified
something.
as something,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
yeah.
no, don't you know in your baptism, this is who you are.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, so then knowing that's who you are, act like it.
Yeah, and I wish I'd had, we never have enough time in sermons, but I wish I had more time to like just acknowledge, I think, how hard giving is for people.
Yeah, it is.
Because I feel like in my experience of how giving has been treated in churches, it's sort of like this idealized, like, well, it's giving season, so go get with your wife and husband, and you sit around the kitchen table and you look at your finances, and like
everybody's smiling, and there's
yeah,
no
we'll just
arguments,
maybe
right?
we can squeeze a little more. And I mean, does anyone do that?
No, yeah.
that was never my experience, and I don't think it's a lot of people's experience. I think it's a lot more complicated. And when you start delving into your giving, you start opening up what can be some really difficult areas, like relationally, emotionally, financially. And so growing and giving may not look like I'm going to increase my tithe by X percentage. It just may look like I'm going to address some tricky issues with my spouse about how we value church. I mean, some people are married to people who don't go to church. So how do you talk about giving if your spouse isn't a believer? Or how do you, if people's financial situations can be in disarray because they were never taught basic financial skills. So growing in generosity may be like being vulnerable enough to talk to somebody about what you're experiencing and asking for help. So I don't know. I want to expand people's imagination for what growing in generosity looks like. It's not about giving more money to the church. It's about becoming more the person that God wants you to be.
Yeah. So like I was just doing this last night in this season because we have this like booklet, right, that the church has all taken, and really the point of the booklet isn't like, now go look at your finances and do these things, but it's sort of a seek first the kingdom of God booklet, as really how I imagine it, and leading people in conversations with God and with the people closely, their partners, right? Their families, about what that looks like. Yeah. And then having the vulnerability, like you said, either ask for help or invite or listen for God's invitation for you to grow. So it's a really gentle, like has way more to do with the kind of person we're becoming in the care of Jesus than it does, again, like you said, like prescriptive actions, the sort of legalism sort of. But one of the things that this season has caused me to do was just last night, I was on our budgeting app on my phone after work, and I was looking through like, what are my reoccurring expenses? What are the subscriptions? What are the streaming services we have? And I found like 3 things. I was like, I don't really need this. And so we started just cleaning house. And that's not out of like, well, I better get rid of this, or else I'm going to go to hell. But it's more of a, hey, every time of year around now, we do the spiritual practices around cultivating generosity. So have some intention, like check in with yourself and your money and your budgeting, and have those conversations. And it's okay. It's like, we know this is hard, but this is the time when you're not alone in doing it. You're in a community of people who are doing it as well. And so sitting there looking through this app on my phone, I was encouraged, like, we're a part of, and then telling Michelle, like, hey, here's what I canceled. Hope you're cool with it. We were really, I felt encouraged that I'm a part of a community everybody's thinking about this, doing something to just reconsider, like, Lord, is there space I can be making in the ways I've arranged my budget and my living with my money? In the hopes that it's not just me sort of saving money, right? But it's creating space for opportunities to give or to be generous to my neighbors, to the church, to others, especially those in need. Yeah. Anyways, there's a little anecdote from last night.
Well, I didn't have space for this in my sermon, but it makes me think of this illustration I thought of, which is like, I feel like checking in with your giving, it's sort of like going for your annual physical, because you can be like, I'm in great shape. And then you get blood work and you're like, whoa, I thought my diet was good. And, I thought I was exercising, but my numbers are showing something different. So, I mean, we can think we're generous people, and then you sit down and you start looking through all this stuff, and it can kind of point you to areas where it's like, oh, maybe this isn't in line with realities I thought it was. So it can just be, like you're saying, kind of a chance to just check in on all the things. And it could just point you to places where God might be like, hey, you might want to pay a little attention to this space in your life.
Should we have parts of the liturgical year where everyone goes and gets a physical, though, and then goes to the dentist, and then goes to like a therapist? Maybe Lent.
We would be a very popular church, right. Or not.
Everyone would love this.
maybe not.
Invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you want us to like all share the things we've done?
You can, sure. I'm not going to, unless you don't want to, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
What have we done this year to grow in our giving? Starting with you, Ryan, you were going to say something.
Oh, no. I was going to say something totally different, but no, I mean, I think Bliss and I have committed to just it's typically every year or every 6 months to like find ways, just kind of look at things and just find ways for us to figure out where we can give just a little bit more. It's not like we don't do things really drastically, but we're trying to grow in our giving. And so we just kind of make a point to every 6 to 12 months, just sit down and say, how can we give more? So it's at least once a year, but sometimes we do it a little bit more often.
And I think something that's really important to mention alongside this, like that's a gift to be able to do that, right?
Right. That's what we've been committing to doing because we want to grow in our giving, and we're trying to figure out ways to do that. And so sometimes that means, like you said, like looking at what are we spending our money on? What can we maybe do less? I was just the thing I was going to share, which I've been really struck by actually. Something that I want to implement in some ways, but I was just listening to a lecture by Professor William Kavanaugh about all of this, kind of like he's talking about consumerism, things like that. And one of the things he talks about is how it's this common notion that we're like really, like our culture is very materialistic, right? You hear that a lot, people saying, oh, look at how materialistic we are. And he's like, actually, it's the opposite. We've become less materialistic in the sense that we live in a culture where we don't value the things that we own. Like they're all disposable. Everything we can just throw it away. Yeah. And so for me, one of the things I want to do, kind of just as I was thinking about what he was saying, is like I want to value my stuff more. So it might mean actually having less stuff, or like maybe getting rid of stuff, or not buying as much like stuff that can just be thrown away, but actually valuing the things that I do have, and becoming more materialistic in that sense. Because I do think that like I am not like there's a lot of my life that feels like is built around just consuming things that I would then throw away. Right. So I'm thinking about, okay, how can I live into being more of a generous person by like having less, buying less, consuming less, but really valuing the things that I do have, and then being able to like have the extra space to be more generous in other areas of my life. So.
Do y'all notice how justice and care for creation is actually tied into?
Yeah.
Totally.
Have you seen this?
Oh yeah.
For sure.
We're gonna like do a whole series on this.
Yeah. Okay.
A whole teaching series. It's all intertwined. So
That's the end that we're going for, though, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because it's in my sermon too.
yeah, tell us about that.
My sermon
Tell us
too.
about that, Courtney.
No, that it is every time we're generous, like we're making a little more of the kingdom of Christ present. Because it was also Christ the King Sunday on Sunday. But how do we bring the kingdom present today? Well, our generosity, by our even little acts of generosity, we're expanding the kingdom. That's how I put it in the sermon.
Yeah, I love that. You're or as I like hear you talking about this, when you buy less or things that matter, you're often put in touch with the person who made it too, which is a good thing. And so now there's like community involved, and material waste is reduced, and like the things that you have is simplified. And on a massive scale, as we do that as a human society, you can see the whole earth, the whole world, and all its people being renewed and refreshed. And like, I mean, speaking of creation care, the earth would be healed. This I was thinking of during the pandemic when everyone was not driving, and how the earth actually recovered a little bit. Like there is, when we talk about the renewing of the earth, I think it sometimes can come across like spiritual. But that was the first time in my lifetime where part of the news was like, hey, the earth was like healing itself. This ecosystem, this brilliant, this geniusly designed thing is recovering because we are doing less, because we're not consuming as much. So it's actually a real material thing, right?
Is anyone else envisioning the end credits from WALL-E?
Oh yeah, I love WALL-E.
That's what you're talking about.
Wait, what happens at the end credits?
WALL-E
The
is
end
my favorite
credits,
Pixar movie.
It's a beautiful. Sorry, it's total.
Is it when they
like-
get off the spaceship?
I've preached on this, by the way. So keep going. Keep
Okay,
going.
I was going to
Your
say this
first
is a
sermon.
total
Yes.
like off the topic, but yeah, it's at the end of the movie when they all come back to Earth, and Earth has been totally trashed except for the one little seed which they plant, and over this beautiful depiction, they show Earth going back to just this state of just gorgeous, flourishing creation. So
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is that they become human again too, because the whole point is that like they've forgotten how to be human, and so it took a robot to like teach them how to be human again. But
Such a great movie.
Yeah.
and thank you for acknowledging that. That was
You're welcome.
That's great memory, by the way.
That was his first sermon at Res.
Oh, it was WALL-E.
I talked about WALL-E.
Oh, is that the Augustine quote too? Incurvatas.
It was part of that. Yeah. Thank you for remembering that too. Incurvatus and
There
say.
it is. There it is. Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Really quick, other movies.
Let's keep going.
I'm thinking of Willy Wonka
Oh my gosh.
and like all the vices of
course you
consumerism.
are.
You know.
Yes.
Anyways,
Yeah, that's true.
I have all these. Okay. Anyway, what else
lots of
about your
sermons.
sermon?
We'll do a whole movie sermon series.
You know who would love that? Your husband?
My husband would, but he likes a different kind, like independent films, documentaries,
like subtitles, other
horror
languages.
movies. Yeah. So
We
he's a little
can
bit
try.
elitist in his movie taste. Okay, enough about my husband. Let's get back to my sermon.
We'll take that part out of
Yeah.
Yeah, cut that out,
podcast.
Alex.
So, like my self-reflection on how I'm being challenged in this way, growing in generosity, is kind of it's not what I expected. And that, like, because Ryan and I were kind of in, I think, a different place than a lot of people. We're a little older. You know, we've as both lawyers, so we were sort of in a place where we do have resources to be able, you know, to be thoughtful and strategic about giving. But my tendency is, because Ryan, first of all, right now he's making most of the money, and he just loves like getting into the nitty gritty of the finances. I just tend to just kind of abdicate my responsibility for giving over to him. So like he'll kind of come up with a proposal of what we should do, and I'll be like, yeah, it looks great.
Rubber stamp.
Yeah. And I think that like that's not okay. And that's not actually what he wants. He's actually trying to get me to be more engaged in it, but it's easier not to. And so I think that there can be that tendency, perhaps if you have a couple and one sort of does the finances, for the other person to be like less engaged and sort of let go and abdicate the responsibility over giving. And I would just like challenge people like me and people who do that to like be more present to it and like recognize like that's community property. It's you're in it together, and you have a voice, and you should have a voice in all those giving decisions.
That convicts me, because my wife for years is always the Ryan Green and sort of looking at everything. She used to, we can cut this too, but if we need to, leave it. But her checkbook, she wrote in by hand for years. You know, like all of her expenses.
My grandmother still does this.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Are we gonna go there?
Let me stop you. And I told Brian's like, you're not going to out me on the podcast. He keeps everything handwritten, like down to the last cent. He keeps these little handwritten ledgers.
Hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
So anyways, some people are into that. But I mean, she doesn't do that anymore, because our bank does that. You can like download it.
You can print it out.
Yeah, you can see it. But that's cool if people do that. I really don't mean to pick on that, because in that there's actually a care for the resources they have, and attention to it.
Yeah.
That I'm convicted about how in our relationship sometimes I can be a little hands off, because
It's actually, you know, like I'm sure someone said this better than I'm about to say it, but like the fact that we don't like physically hold money anymore, and the fact that it's all just like in some computer, like we're separated from our money in a way that's actually unhelpful. It's like it's actually a tactic to like kind of
devaluing in some ways,
it's
right?
devaluing, but it's like it's our way of kind of like escaping having to deal with it. It just kind of exists out
We can be
there.
more thoughtless.
We have credit cards.
Yeah.
We don't know what
You don't have
know.
to swipe anymore. Just like
Yeah.
get
Right.
near it and it beeps at you. And
So, I mean, I think the fact that if you're someone who's like writing things down, or people who handle money, it's like there's something valuable about that, you know? So anyway, sorry.
No, that's Courtney. Anything else about your sermon that's striking you now, as you sort of had some distance from it as well?
It's probably good for now.
Yeah.
I want to leave time for Melissa too.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll pop in with some other ideas.
All right, let's move on then.
Yeah.
So Melissa, great. We've been preaching through this, and I can come back to, actually I'm thinking about my sermon, but while we've been preaching, what's been going on with kids in the classroom, and why do you like express your heart about like why it's important for kids to be a part of this conversation that for probably most people's church experiences, this was only happening in the big church, right? And the kids weren't given a chance to participate.
Yeah. So I really felt like when we started this series, it's kind of hard to attack or like talk to kids about like giving their money, because a lot of them just don't have money. And so I didn't want to spend all of their time in class talking about like, you should give 10% of the Christmas money that your grandmother gives you. You know what I mean?
The tooth fairy.
Yeah, or the tooth fairy gives you
quarter.
$1. Like, you should give 10 cents to the church. And so instead of going that direction, I wanted to turn more and really focus in on the deeper parts, where you guys have been talking a lot about cultivating these like helper, like generous hearts, and also cultivating like a non-anxious spirit. And so how can we lay the groundwork to help these kids be helpers, which they already are because little kids love to help. So let's just roll with that and run with it. And really acknowledge how they are generous and how they can be generous, but also really talking about like, hey, you don't have to worry about things because God, he's here for you. He has a generous heart. He's taking care of you. So really laying the groundwork in all of the scripture verses and focusing on that. So like with your sermon, we really focused on how the woman had a very generous heart, like when she was giving her mites away.
Oh, right.
And so how can you have a generous heart with others? And could you maybe give items away, or how can you help people, like help your brothers or sisters,
Like
or
share
help
things,
or
right?
share things?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Where concrete things that they can do that maybe has less to do with money and more to do with creating a generous spirit. And same with Ryan's sermon, talking about like, you don't have to worry because God takes care of the birds, he takes care of the flowers. And, you know, if it doesn't rain, what do we do to the flowers in our yard? Oh, well, God created people so that we could water the flowers and so that we could care for creation. And so God's going to like put people in your life to care for you, and like your parents or grandparents or different things like that. And then with Courtney's sermon, which was tricky, we like named that the story was kind of harsh because Jesus, and we also named that it was a parable. So it was a story. It was not real life. And Jesus told stories a lot. We always talk about with parables how they're stories that Jesus tells to help people understand, and they're not real. They're like fantasy stories that teach a lesson, almost like a fable or something that you might read in school. But we named that the story felt a little harsh because of the sheep and the goats, but that we can really focus on the king and how, because it was Christ the King Sunday, and how the king gives generously and how he like cares for the sheep, and in turn, because the king gives generously, the sheep can then care for others. So really focusing on that and building a foundation of helper hearts and non-anxious spirits.
Man, that's amazing. I mean, and that is, can you imagine when the formation that our kids are getting, how that translates into the home, and seeing our kids sharing things or taking turns when maybe they didn't, or offering to help in small ways with chores, or there's like all of these little things that we can do that create certain kinds of people, that form certain kinds of people that are just generous. And it's for me, it's a refreshing reminder, like this isn't actually about our money when it comes down to it, right? This is about the condition of our hearts with relation to the things that we have and to others, like how we share those things, make space for others in those things.
Right. And if we cultivate this heart of generosity in children, then imagine like when they're grown up, sorry, Alex, when they're grown up, it's second nature for them to give and to be givers. That's like their first instinct is to give out of their generosity, not because they feel like they have to, but because they realize how much they actually enjoy loving and giving people.
That's beautiful.
Giving to people.
That's great.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had more of that.
I know.
I mean, I
Right?
love that because, you know, when you sort of set forth this, you know, biblical tithe standard for little kids, then it does feel like this check the box. You know, if I just give that 10 cents out of my dollar, then I'm pleasing Jesus and I'm done. Versus like it's a requirement you have to fulfill versus what you're saying, which is creating a person that generosity flows from their heart. That's just who they are.
Yeah.
So you're starting that work we're like trying to do now, but at the very beginning, which is just so amazing.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and I think we almost, with the 10%, like tithing 10%, you almost cut yourself short because it becomes like that checkbox.
Right.
And then you think, oh, well, I'm tithing. I'm giving my 10%. That's all I need to do, when there's so much more that actually you need, that we as Christians or as people living on this earth are called to do, to be generous for others, and it's not just checking off the tithe box. It's more. And so when we open up the door and ask God, like, hey, what do you want me to do with what you have blessed me with my money or with my things,
Or your skills,
time,
your abilities,
skills, yeah,
your gifts.
You just open up so many different ways that you can be helping people. And I think then we also create this notion within kids that, it's like, it is my job to love and help people. That is what I'm called to do.
Yeah. Kind of limits the imagination for what giving looks like
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure.
with the tithe. Yeah.
Almost like, I mean, where some people may not be able to give a biblical standard or whatever for tithing, maybe there's some people who feel called to give more than that. Like it,
Right.
you know, in the same way, or just like you were talking about with their skills or abilities or serving or giving in other ways. Like I think there is this, like you said, the imagination that we have can often be just really like narrow in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's real. I'm so glad that our kids are involved in the conversation, you know, and it makes me wonder too, like as we continue, like all of these things we talk about in a life of like a disciple of Jesus can find a home in the liturgy, like these acts that we all participate in as a community. So our kids are learning these lessons, our adults and everyone, you know, and all the older folks are like middle schoolers that up, you know, are hearing the sermons, but yet we all come in and participate in these acts of liturgy that reinforce or give us those spaces to practice these things we're learning about becoming generous people. And it's generosity is a virtue. But I think it's really important to say we're not doing it merely because it's virtuous. We are doing it because we want to be like Jesus. And so maybe that's like just semantics here. Now, for me, it's not, because it's actually very personal. This isn't just an ideal of the kind of person I want to be. It's that I actually want to be near Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to share in his life. I want to be known by him. I want to be recognizable to him. You know, I think he's brilliant. I want to follow him. And these are the things he's inviting me into. Sometimes those things are hard. Sometimes they're a little easier for me than maybe for someone else. But I think it's really important that this is like Christocentric, right? Like just, this is actually all about who we see Jesus to be and wanting to be like that for the sake of others as well. I think it's like a really compelling thing. So for our kids to be already on that road of being transformed into Christ likeness in this small way, I think is like really profound. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Were you going to
No,
say something?
well, speaking
go
of the
for it.
liturgy, I feel like I don't, it's not the center of the liturgy in a lot of ways. It like, in terms of like the high point or anything like that. But the doxology for me is always, it's like, it's the pivot in the middle of the service from like word to table. But for me, back even when I was a youth pastor at my evangelical church, I would make our kids sing the doxology every week
With open hands.
Yep, and we would and like it's on my Facebook cover page.
Why don't we do that?
What?
They sing it in class.
No, but the adults,
Oh, I
and like
teach
the rest
them
of us.
to open their hands.
Well, what the heck,
I
guys?
do on the table.
I mean,
because
we do,
we have to.
We have to.
It's part of our liturgy. But
To get everybody in like people who are listening to this, let's not make an announcement. Just if you've listened to the podcast at the doxology, open your hands and be like, oh,
Secret club. Part of the secret club now.
This is how
you don't have
Gnosticism
to do
Podcast
it.
listeners.
Hormats, we're looking at you.
There's like 7 listeners.
They're the only
guys.
ones that listen. It's the
Yeah.
Well, my
Hormats.
wife
Right.
listens
Okay,
sometimes.
okay.
Once she did.
Yeah. No, all I was going to say about that,
It's a half an episode. No.
there's something about it being at the center of the liturgy for me that's in like I don't know how to describe this, I guess, but what you were saying reminded me of this idea that like we're called to live our lives doxologically, like always with this idea that we're praising God from whom all blessings flow. We're grateful for the things he's done, and we in turn live that way ourselves, you know? So there's something about that I really love. And I've always we sing the doxology to our kids every night before bed. It's just a part of a rhythm of life that I think is important, you know? So,
And you don't really, for me, I always have to see things in contrast to really appreciate the point. So with living a life doxologically, or like giving glory to God, as opposed to what? Like what would be the sort of the counterpoint, the antithesis to that, right? A person who either glorifies themselves, and that's a dead end. Jeez, that's like so lame and boring, actually. Or someone who's just sort of, and that requires a person to be so turned in on themselves and their problems that it reminds me of Gollum, actually.
Yeah.
Right, and the ring and all that business. But there is such a different image there. Someone turned in, someone self-centered, someone who I actually have a lot of pity for, that's sort of imprisoned in a very lonely, dark place of that's like, I have to provide for myself because no one else will. And I actually have a lot of compassion for those folks. And and actually we are those folks too, right? To be fair.
I was going to say, I am that person.
I am that person.
Often, yeah.
So it's singing the doxology is to use your analogy about forest bathing, is like bathing in the doxology again. Is like reminding ourselves, like, oh wait, this isn't reality. This isn't the world I live in. That's not who I am.
Yeah, and I think maybe one step removed from that, slightly better but still problematic, is people who live for other people. Like people who live entirely for their children or entirely for their spouse or family. That's better, but it's not the end thing. And I think that can come with a lot of fear too, because I mean, I wrestle with this. It's like, what if something happened to my children? Like that's the ultimate like fear. And I really like wrestle with that. It deeply troubles me, as it probably does most parents. And like the only way I feel like I can really live fully and healthfully is to just accept that there actually is something bigger that encompasses me and my children, and that's carrying us and that transcends me and my responsibility for them.
That gives you some rest, right? There's something to like hold on to, a sure footing, right? A rock of sorts in that news. I think that's right.
And I thought I had to on the whole like liturgy, sort of the gratitude in the liturgy. Also, what we're sent out with, the post communion prayer. It's this rhythm of like we say the thank you for feeding us in the spiritual food of the most precious body and blood of your Son, our Savior Jesus Christ. Right. So we're thanking God for just being fed, and now as we go out into the world. To do the work you've given us to do. So like, that's always the image when I'm trying to boil down the liturgy to something simple, this great mysterious thing. It's like we are being fed so we can be sent out to do this like wonderful, hard, challenging, brilliant, meaningful work.
That's good. Yeah. We have got, Jesus has given away himself and we've fed on that. And now we are being sent to give away, is kind of, in the language of our sermon series, I feel like that's kind of the image that I kept coming back to. Somehow we are then called to do that same thing, to extend the body of Christ out into the world in giving away in that sense. So
yeah, we have good work to do. We have a part to play in this, right? We're not just spectators. And I think that's probably some of the force behind when Jesus teaches about this. The force that we sense from his teaching, that he takes this very seriously, actually. He preaches about money maybe more often than anything else. Right? And there's a conviction behind it. And I wonder if it's because we talked about there's a social, a justice aspect to this. This has impact on others, right? In our community and those in need, especially. But this, like what we do with what we've been given really matters to him because we have a part to play in the kingdom he's setting up. That's a mystery to me. The all-powerful, all-knowing, like a God who lacks nothing, invites us to participate in a kingdom that he's bringing about, and what we do matters. That's like,
yeah. And as we're going into Advent, and we think about like God preparing the world for Jesus. God prepared the world for each one of us, because we have a specific work that God's given us to do. And so I think
that's a good point.
Thinking of that in Advent, and like, what is my work? There's a responsibility with that. I think there's also humility too, in that what I've been given to do actually belongs to God. So,
well, since I'll do this quick, because mine was actually the first, and I'm preaching again this week. But my first sermon was called "Giving Away for the Sake of the Most Vulnerable," and it was the Jesus with the Pharisees, and he was just sort of like always sort of rebuking the Pharisees. And then he calls his disciples to sit next to him. He says, watch this. And they observe a widow putting her last coin into the treasury at the temple. And he says she gave more, essentially, than any of these Pharisees or scribes who were these elites, right? Who are well dressed and dropping money bags in the treasury. And growing up and hearing that sermon, I always heard it preached in terms of sacrificial giving, the virtue of sacrificial giving. And there is like a virtue in giving sacrificially. Giving shouldn't just be totally comfortable. You should feel the impact of it, and you should make space in your budget and in your life to give. Like, if it doesn't come from you, from something, if it doesn't cost you, is it really a gift? So there is a point there, but I think that's a point that's overlabored on this text, because and he was just specifically before this talking about the Pharisees devouring the houses of widows, right? And basically taking advantage of the most in need and vulnerable. To be a widow in that time was to be utterly and completely dependent on the generosity of others in that like hyper patriarchal society. And so what we have here is Jesus. And I think, you can read the same gospel texts all the time, come back to them again and go, how did I not see this? This is so much more brilliant than I saw it the last time.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the appreciation I had to it coming to this was, I think Jesus is actually making a really brilliant and somewhat subtle point about the fact that this woman, as a widow in need, should not ever have been in a position where that's all she had to give. That he's commenting not on, of course, there is a beauty in her giving. Of course, yes. And yet there's this sting in his teaching, Jesus' teaching, that's criticizing the community around her.
Yeah.
And saying, essentially, bringing judgment upon them. This should never be the case. And the reason this is so important to me is because I think a lot in our talks about generosity and giving, the things that get overlooked are that our giving is actually to benefit those in need. Yes, it pays the clergy who we have God has called to set aside for this ministry. It pays those things. It pays all kinds of things, utilities and spaces. But these aren't just sort of paying bills. These are the gifts of God's people converted really into either spaces where people can encounter the love of God, either in physical spaces or in relationships or in ministry. If you think about the church, like our giving is converted into ministry, right? Signs of the kingdom in real people's lives. And specifically, there's a priority that God seems to have about those who are most in need.
Yeah.
I had mentioned this story, and again, I don't know if this is, I think it's responsible, again, knowing that God is like abundant, right? But we've overspent our benevolence budget by $12,000. We're not even through the year yet. And I'm really proud of that, actually, because we have this plan about, okay, here's how much we really should plan on giving, that every year we blow through. And I think that expresses the heart of our church. Because by the way, I'm not in a closet making these calls by myself, right? I have either I'll pitch it to you guys, but there's also a process of like, I go to our people's ward and our vestry and say, here's the need. Here's what we have. What do you think we should do? And our vestry and I, over and again, especially with these significant needs, are compelled in generosity to say, let's take care of these people. This is a real need. Yeah. We have it. There's a joy, actually. There's not an anxiety, there's a joy. This is what I see Jesus trying to draw out of us in this text is the generosity of his people to benefit in sort of this order, like the most in need. This isn't just about getting your money in order or like budgeting better or cutting down so that you can give more. There's an impact. There's a result of our generosity. It matters. It matters in the lives of widows, orphans, immigrants, the poor. It matters. And so another aspect of this that's really, really important to me is people who hear our conversation about giving who are just in places where they can't give or they're in crisis. Man, I know these is so common. I've been in that place actually. And so I can appreciate like what it's like to not have a lot and not know how you're going to like pay the bills and how you're going to like pay for medical coverage and things like that. And to that, I don't think we have a God who looks on that coldly and says, well, you better squeeze it out, like give,
you don't need electricity.
Right. That's actually not the point of this gospel story. I think the point is that you have, those folks need to hear, and it sounds like you mentioned this as well, that you have a God who knows your needs, and you have a community also who loves you and is there to help. And the last thing that first, like I say, Jesus is not telling you skip rent, skip groceries, skip electricity, skip even your kids' basic needs to fund the church, to give to the church as if to earn some sort of spiritual merit badge while neglecting some of these like most basic needs. In reality, the judgment doesn't come upon the people who can't give. The judgment comes upon the community that is unconcerned with the inequalities that create these sorts of situations. And I think of our public school system, and I just get I know you get frustrated about this.
Yeah.
Or like the homelessness challenge that we have in South Austin that is super complex. And really our own neighbors who the poor they're among us. They don't always we don't always present as poor, right? But actually the poor are among us, and there's so much need. And to those people, their needs, it's really important that they hear the compassion of God. And that they experience the generosity of God through his people. Yeah. And that's why I'm proud of our church for like blowing through this budget, because God cares about these people, and actually they're first in the kingdom, right? So like, so this is a way of us. So, and by the way, if you're hearing this and you're like, this Sean is like speaking my language, you should help us close the gap on that $12,000 deficit.
That's right. Or we're gonna have to take out the coffee and donut budget.
That'll get it solved real quick, huh?
Oh man, threaten that.
The kids will start giving money.
Yeah, I know. Please take for the donuts. Yeah,
that's for the donuts.
So, anyways, that's sort of the challenge. And one practical thing that we can do walking away from this is just saying, like, prioritizing. If these are the people that God prioritizes, then how might I prioritize my budgeting, my giving, the way I spend my money? How do I prioritize that to reflect those who God prioritizes? Like priorities, practically. And this was a sort of a realization walking away from the sermon. Then I was like, I could have made that more clear. Was when we can see the way that God prioritizes the needy. Do we? How do we?
Yeah.
Show me. And that was sort of the invitation I was getting as I, picked up the lectern and walked back to my seat was, does my life reflect God's priority for the most vulnerable? Oof.
Yeah.
I want it to. I'm not sure it does.
I don't think any of ours fully do.
No.
And I think growing in generosity is a journey, right? So it could be that maybe it just means giving more. Maybe it means choosing a different neighborhood to live in. I mean, it kind of starts, once you start down that road and looking at how you structured your life and who you're impacting, I think it can go way beyond just giving money. It can go to some pretty major life decisions around like where you live, where you send your kids to school. And I mean, for a lot of us, that's like really challenging.
It's costly.
Really
it is costly, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's why we have to grow. Like, because I don't think most people like this is St. Francis who just sells all his things, and
I was actually
like all the saints, right? Who just go give all their things away to the poor and just go live in poverty. I mean, most of us probably are not going to do that, but we do grow over time. And our lives in 20, 30 years, based on the decisions we're making, little by little, may look a lot different.
Yeah, so there's like all kinds of things. We can't do it all, right?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But I think maybe one thing that I could say that I found really, really impactful here, honestly, with any sort of discipleship challenge, right? There's so much that I need to change. Sure. Begin with this question. I think this is in that booklet. Begin with this question, asking God in prayer. God, where do you want me to be with my money? God, what do you want me to do with all of these challenges? It may be, hey, you need to ask for help, and you need to hear the grace that, like, I don't need your money. In fact, I have people around you who would love to help care for you and support you and get you through this hard time. That's good news. I mean, literally, the gospel is good news to the poor, right? That may be what you hear. And to that, I would say, man, that makes my church proud, me proud of our church if we can be the good news for people in need. For a lot of us, though, for many of us, it may be, you may hear something else when you say, God, what do you want me to do with my money? It may just be one thing right now, the next step. Yeah. And I think that those like incremental steps, like you said, over time, they matter. Mm-hmm. They change things. But we have to be courageous enough and obedient or willing enough to say, okay, okay, Lord, I hear that. And everyone has to ask that for themselves, right?
Right.
There's no prescription that fits everybody. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We ought to ask that.
But I think, I mean, just thinking about my sermon and Jesus' invitation to seek first the kingdom, it feels like, how can we do that with our money? Like, it could be a good baseline question to ask. Like, how do I seek first the kingdom with my money? Is a worthwhile,
totally,
or not even like we were talking about before. How can I seek first the kingdom of God in my life in general is probably the first, a good question, but it includes what we have, like the things that God has given us. So,
yeah, that's beautiful.
And invite your kids into that.
Yeah, it's a family conversation.
Like, I mean, I'm thinking about when you were going through and like not renewing some of your subscription services, like inviting your kids into that moment or asking them like, hey, we want to give more in this way. So what's something that you think maybe we could give up? Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it could be like not going out to eat one time a month or something like that, that would be a sacrifice.
By the way, my family going out to eat would save, like, we don't go out to eat.
Well, or like maybe not ordering a pizza or like, I don't know, like something like that would just be like a small sacrificial thing that you could start planting the seeds, but let your kids kind of think about a way that is a way to invite your kids into that space.
That's a great idea.
Where it's just small. It's not asking them to give up a ton and like live in poverty, but it's a small thing that you can invite them into. I don't know, like, let's not buy a gallon of ice cream this week, and like then we can give our money, and that's a way to do that too.
Yeah. Totally. Or how about you eat all the food on your plate, kids?
No, don't do that.
That's actually a different podcast.
No, that's unhealthy.
Beyond the scope of today's podcast.
There you go. That's better.
And Sean will not be hosting a parenting podcast.
Our parenting class is coming up.
That is a great place to end, actually. Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
Well, so in conclusion, first of all, thank you guys for taking time to get on here and share some of the insights you've had from your sermons and from the work you're doing with children. This takes a community, and I hope that those watching and listening get a sense that this work of discernment isn't something that your ministry leaders, your clergy are sending the church away to do, but we're actually a part of. This is something that we are working on as well. And so you're not alone in this work, and you have us, and we're in it too. Like we've got work to do too. But I've learned some great things from you. So thank you for spending time with us and giving your insights. And for everyone who's listening and watching, if you have other thoughts or insights or things that you would want to share, we always love getting emails from y'all or texts or whatever. Let us know that you're listening, and if you found anything helpful, it helps to. And honestly, I just love hearing the stories about what God's doing in people's lives about these things as we lean in as a community. So let us know. And just as a quick sort of tag at the end here, this will be the last sermon, this upcoming sermon. I would talk about, but I haven't written it yet. And nobody wants to hear about the sermon before. Let's hear it once, right?
It could be totally different by Sunday.
Yeah, it probably would. But we're going to finish the sermon series, but the season of generosity continues. And we're actually beginning a window of 2 weeks where our church is going to share their plans for like having done this work, having listened to sermons and talked and processed and discerned and prayed through this booklet and asked God, where do you want me with this? Now we're going to like share confidentially, hey, here's an invitation. Here's what I think, how I'm going to respond to God's invitation this year coming around. And in that small step, it does a few things. Number one, it helps us like get an idea of like where our church is and how we can sync up with the giving of the church, right? With our expenses. That's practical. But the other thing is it's really a response to a season of prayer. I actually see it like the offertory when they bring up the gifts, This is the church bringing up their gifts and saying, okay, Lord, this next year, here's what we hear you doing. and with joy and with anticipation about what you're going to do with all this. We can't wait to see. So I want to invite everyone, and then it's open now. Actually, by the time this podcast drops, it'll be open. To you'll see it in the newsletter. You can go to resaustin.com/give, and you'll see a button there for to give a pledge, is what it's called, for 2024. I invite you guys to do that. It's not something that we're going to hunt you down over, or it's nothing like that. It's really your way of expressing the discernment work that you have done, and really being a part of the offertory. And those confidential pledges are compiled, so we don't get to see like particular ones.
I was going to say,
we get a picture.
When you say confidential, you mean clergy won't see individual pledges. We only see like the big number at the end.
We'll see the big roll up, and that roll up is actually really helpful for us. So. And I should say, if you're going through this process and you realize like, I don't know what I can pledge, I don't know if I do anything. I think it's really still important to get on there and say, like, even put 0 down and say, and leave a message with us like, hey, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm struggling with.
How can we pray for you?
Yeah, that's part of how can we pray for you? So part of this is also opening up a channel of communication pastorally for us to say, hey, what are your needs? How can we pray for you? How can we be there for you as a community? Because this is what that giving is actually for. This is what we're called to do. So this whole thing, to me, is good news. I hope y'all hear this as good news and not as a sort of weird, heavy-handed, legalistic thing. It's none of that. It's never been that way, Res. This is good news. So I invite you all to participate in that. All right. Well, with that, thanks again, y'all, for being here. And thanks for everyone listening. We'll talk to you next time.